صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. With nation of Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قاف والقرآن المجيد بل عجبوا أن جاءهم منذر منهم فقال الكافرون هذا شيء عجيب أإذا متنا وكنا ترابا ذلك رجع بعيد قد علمنا ما تنقص الأرض منهم وعندنا كتاب حفيظ بل كذبوا بالحق لما جاءهم فهم في أمر مريج أفلم ينظروا إلى السماء فوقهم كيف بيناها وزيناها وما لها من فروج والأرض مددناها وألقينا فيها رواسي وأنبتنا فيها من كل زوج بهيج تبصرة وذكرى لكل عبد منيب ونزلنا من السماء ماء مباركا فأنبتنا به جنات وحب الحصيد والنخل باسقات لها طلع نضيد رزقا للعباد وأحيينا به بلدة ميتا كذلك الخروج صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Salawat. Today we're very fortunate to have Nada al Hudaid, who will be speaking to us on Shia religious art in the Arab world and beyond. Let's welcome her. Salawat ala Muhammad wa al Muhammad. Dr. Nada is a Yemeni social and visual anthropologist specializing in contemporary Islamic art. Her research interests include the anthropology of art, visual culture, and religion. She obtained her PhD at the University of Manchester on the materiality of Shia artists in Kuwait. More specifically, she focused on female artists who are able to establish their own religious settings and practice piety through art. She's currently working as a research fellow in the Al Taruma project at Lund University, which is led by Professor Oliver Shawat, and focusing on the materiality of art in relation to dreams and miracles amongst Shia in Kuwait and the United Kingdom. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, Miqdad, for the invitation. I'm quite honored because this is my first time, in a way, to speak to a Shi'i audience. So I look forward to your comments, to your impressions, and to your ideas as well. As Miqdad already said, so my work is mainly on Shia art. So before starting and talking about Shia art, I would love to extend a question. I would love to extend a question to everyone, and I would like to hear your ideas of what do you think is Islamic art? What is Islamic art? Calligraphy. Geometrical shapes. Expressions of the Muslim ideas in the external world, okay. So when you hear the word Islamic art, these are the things that comes to mind as Shia, right? Which is quite interesting. Sorry? Yes, and that's why I'm quite happy to ask this question here. Yes.
I think with particular to Shia art, I think the way you visualize zaris or different places where our imams are buried, I think is also like a form of Shia art.
Okay, so the depiction of Ahlul Bayt or saintly figures in Shia, very well. So it's quite interesting for me because I have been trying to explore this question of what is art, what is Islamic art, and then what is Shi'i art in particular. And I'm finding it quite interesting because museums are an institution of authority. So whatever is being put in a museum, by default, everyone or almost a lot of people take that as the definition of what art is, regardless whether it's Shi'i or non-Shi'i, Islamic, non-Islamic. But that's kind of what interests me in art, because what I'm going to present to you is not the kind of art that you would go in a gallery to look at, but it's kind of art that involves rituals, and it's part of a tradition of serving Ahlul Bayt, being a servant, a khadim or khadima. So it's quite different, and it will be kind of also challenging for some people to think of this or even consider this as art. And that's kind of the question that I'm interested in, is what is art? What makes art art? So no further ado, let's get started. The art I worked with mainly is, as you can see here on your left side, is statues, and on your right-hand side are paintings. And these come from my fieldwork, which started in 2015 in Kuwait, where I worked with Shi'i artists, males and females, but mostly females. So the painting that you see on your on your right-hand side is the depiction of the head of Imam Hussein after the incident of Karbala. And the artist is Anwar Khurshid, quite a renowned and well-known name in Kuwait. And then you will, on the left side is the statues. So that's where my interest in Shi'i art became even more in depth, is because I was interested in this form of art, because usually the understanding that depicting figures and animals is forbidden in Islam. So when I went there and I saw it's all about depicting human beings and depicting animals, like the horse of Imam Hussein, for example, and that's quite kind of interesting to see what is taught versus what is practiced. And we are not here theologians. I'm not here to tell you what is halal, what is haram. I'm here just to say what people practice, what connects people to Ahlul Bayt. And this is basically it. So what interests me in looking at this form of art, which is labeled as serving to Ahlul Bayt, is looking at the spaces that people use. And I worked with women. So lots of women dedicate big portions of their houses. And I think as Shia yourselves, many of you will have this as a norm, that you dedicate parts of your homes if you can afford it. Maybe in the UK it's quite difficult, but usually that's quite a norm, that people dedicate spaces just to celebrate or to commemorate Ahlul Bayt, and usually known as Husseyniyat. In this case, in this particular case, women just empties a whole floor and dedicates it for other women to come and teach each other art, different forms of art, so that when they come to an exhibition that's either on Muharram or on the birth of an imam, they can contribute with something artistic. And it's for free. This is not charged, and it's what interests me as well is the idea that the age range is anything from 12, and it also goes beyond this age as well. So anything from 12 years old until 25, that's the quite sensitive age range where, when there's a lot of empty time, as we call it in Arabic, but in English, I think like lots of, free time. That's when, if you don't have activities that involve lots of, creativity and using them towards, useful things, unnecessary or not necessary good things happen. And I found that quite interesting, because these are mainly very conservative families who cares about their children, and they really want them to enjoy, have fun, but at the same time they don't want to do things that they don't necessarily see as halal. But in this case, I found art kind of filled that gap, and men has similar spaces, but for women even more. So lots of young girls, they come to these safe spaces for hours, and they practice it on daily basis, a monthly, weekly basis. They set their own time frame, And that's how I found very interesting engagements between how they can share ideas and have fun and eat and enjoy. But at the same time, they're doing it to serve Ahlul Bayt. So it's kind of two-in-one activity. This is kind of a little bit of the before an exhibition, what the studio would look like. Lots of things are scattered around, and everyone is painting, and everyone is helping everyone painting their own thing without the sense of, I'm the owner, I'm the one who helped you. That's not a thing among those artists that I worked with. And also they did start having courses in which they ask for fee or money for it. Because they, some of these artists are really good at what they do, so they found a nice way to compromise between what they think is good on like to earn something that is reasonable, but at the same time to give something back, which is equally important. So they had a vast range of courses in all forms of art that you can imagine. This is a little bit some of the works that come out, and I chose those images because I would like to talk on the idea of aesthetics. And this is the kind of thing I noticed when I present this work in different places. So I meet lots of people who are coming from different backgrounds, and some of them had a moment of honesty, and they were able to share with me what they really think, and they said, this is really ugly. This is nothing beautiful about it, because the idea of beauty or what makes a good portrait or a good painting in their mind defies the idea of what they see. And when I say Islamic art, people again think of all these fantastic geometrical shapes and all these buildings that they've seen, and they expect something along those lines. So when I present something like this to them, that's a bit disappointing. So I want to emphasize here that, leaving aesthetics aside, your ideas of what makes a beautiful painting, if we keep that aside and we look at these paintings for what they are, you will be able to see the beauty and the depth of what has been going on in here. These are women who have no time for luxury because they have so many activities happening. Most of them are women with children and family responsibilities. They find the time to come and paint anything. It doesn't matter. To them, the whole act of them going and finding time and painting, that's an act of worship. That's an act of khidmah in itself. That in itself presents themselves to Ahlul Bayt as servants. And the idea as well that the majority of young people don't find sermons very attractive anymore. They don't connect with them. So art becomes a different form of sermon in a way, where they actually need to listen to sermons and read about Ahlul Bayt in order for them to come up with ideas of what they want to paint. So the processes I noticed, how they come up with an idea, is quite incredible. And what I think, in a way, is kind of a replacement of what a sermon does. Because the idea of a sermon is to keep the young minds, or to keep minds in general, connected to Ahlul Bayt, is to keep the thought and the feelings of Ahlul Bayt alive. And that's what I've noticed in this kind of art. They read a lot, they come and exchange ideas with each other, and then they keep thinking, okay, if I paint the incident of Sayyida Zainab, okay, I don't want to paint her like this. I want to do it in a way that makes a feeling that, the Imam Hussein felt. So they are sometimes digging deeper than what the riwayat actually mentions. So in a way, to me, that is beauty. That goes beyond aesthetics that we normally would understand them to be, or what a museum would present. So again, and speaking again on aesthetics, this was a major debate during my fieldwork as well, between artists who were against these kind of paintings, who would say, I don't allow this kind of paintings to go up because we are representing Ahlul Bayt. We need to represent them in a powerful, strong paintings. I don't like the idea that anyone can come and scratch whatever colors and they call this art. I understand. Very valid point, very good, understanding, and we give them credit for that. However, the other side is equally powerful in their own opinions. And what the other side says, who are we to judge Khuddam Ahlul Bayt? You know, they come to us and they want to scratch even a line. If it's under the name of Ahlul Bayt, who are we to say this is not art? Who are we to say this is not going to be hung for Ahlul Bayt? It's Ahlul Bayt to judge, not us. That's, to me, hands down, the best argument I've heard in terms of aesthetics. So we are speaking here beyond what the eye can see. We are here talking about a connection between the regular person who may not be able to attend sermons because that doesn't work with who they think they are, and between a person who's busy to do other things, but they just craft time to scratch some colors, as they say, and they feel connected to Ahlul Bayt. And I've witnessed so many stories of miraculous things happening to people by doing those forms of worship. So that's the other form of aesthetics again. So for me, having dealt with it a lot and having sat with it a lot, I can't see anymore what other people see when they think of aesthetics. Because to me, this is beautiful because I already know the stories behind this. And also, sometimes because we are so subjugated to what we see on media, what we see on TV, what we see on in museums, we don't understand, or it's not, I wouldn't say we don't understand, but I think we have a very fixed idea about what should be accepted as Islamic art. And this is equally Islamic, I mean, if not more Islamic than any Islamic art I've seen in a museum, because the purpose of this is to connect with God and Ahlul Bayt, and that's quite the beauty and the power of this kind of art. So this is what a museum would look like. So they would not put it, usually speaking, of course, there were moments where they have put it in galleries, but generally speaking, those kind of arts are not exhibited in exhibitions, but mainly in Husayniyat. So there will be a time where they have to, let's say if it's Muharram, then the owner of the Husayniyah will allow them for a specific kind of time and will ask them to exhibit the work, which automatically kind of, to me, is interesting because this is a Shi'i art for Shia people because of the space in itself. Also, you can see from the descriptions, I mean, you can't see here, sorry, but the descriptions are also very brief because it's made for people who understand these stories. So if you see Imam Hussein on a horse, as you can see here, you would automatically understand that's when he's in the battle or something along those lines. So you don't need those backgrounds to understand what the painting is about because you already know these stories from all the sermons you've attended. And so on with almost every other painting. So, so for non-Shi'i or for people who are not accustomed to Shi'i stories or stories of Ahlul Bayt, they would require a lot of background to understand and appreciate this kind of art. And also, I find this art quite interesting because it's a new form of expression that is mixed with an also traditional form. And in this case, we see Sufrat Ahlul, I think it's Imam Mahdi's birth in here. So the Sufra is a form of a traditional kind of service. When there's a birth of an Imam, they put Sufra, and I think most Shia do this. And they, as you can see in the photograph, it's quite beautifully designed. And then they put all these images that have to do with the Imam Mahdi. So then the people who attend the Husayniyah will not only listen to the sermon, enjoy the nice food and the barakah they have there, but also they will have a look at the paintings and enjoy. And most of these paintings are also now put for sale. So sometimes they end up being bought. So I'm going to move now and talk about statues. And the woman you see on the image here is Hayat Ashkanani. She is known as Mish'al. She's a Kuwaiti. She doesn't like to be called an artist. She says she's a khadima of Ahlul Bayt. So she has started working with statues in 2004, before anyone have ever thought of this as a form of depiction of Ahlul Bayt within sermons or even exhibitions. So because the sense of ownership is slightly different within Shia artists, I've noticed, or people who work with art, there's no clear historic tracking where I can say, yeah, other people relate to her, or say, oh yeah, I've started making statues because Mash'al did. Normally, no one knows that she even exists. But I'm trying now with my new book is to actually interview and work with different people who have worked on statues, Shia depictions, to understand where they got their inspiration, and most of them don't know where it came from. However, when we track down the record, she seems to be the first person to do it in this way. So I'm going to explain in a moment how her work is different from what you would normally see in Iran or Iraq. There are official museums of statues. And she started her work also as a form of service after her husband died. So she dedicated all her life literally to make theaters, and she would produce and write the theater pieces herself. And then she came up with the idea that it would be nice after the theater finishes that we have the statue of, let's say, Imam Rida. It stays there for people to come back and visit and sit a bit and have a moment with the Imam. So that was her idea, and it became so well received. Of course, in the beginning, it wasn't well received, and she received a bit of a backlash from some people in the community. But then she went to some scholars, and they had a bit of a debate, and then they said, well, no, this, as long as you are depicting Ahlul Bayt in a respectful way, this is acceptable. So she got the okay from it, and then she taught many other people that in Kuwait, and then you will see it also in other neighboring countries. But people have developed their own styles because it's so easy to do that. I mean, easy, relatively speaking. It's not easy, like I can't do it. But in a way, you don't need to be an artist. And that's the difference between her and what you would see in a museum. And that's the beauty, again, of this kind of art that works for commemorative, for ritual purposes. Anyone can learn it, anyone can do it. And you don't need the tag of being an artist, or you've gone to study, in the University of God knows what. So that's quite interesting. This is kind of what it looks like. Before an exhibition, she recycles a lot of her statues. She uses and reuses them all the time. And this was before the Ma'rad of Sayyida Zainab in 2015. So she uses bendable iron, very soft iron that anyone can bend easily. And she uses, as you can see, a lot of tape. And she has very precise measurements for the bodies of a woman, a man, and children, so that she gets the proportions correct. And then she uses a lot of elements, that whatever she can find from shops and even Halloween shops. And she uses the insulation pipes just to give the impression of bones. And then a lot of cotton. Cotton is quite prominent in her work. That gives the sensation of flesh. So if you touch those mannequins, you will actually feel they're real. And it's quite interesting. And this is the end result of this mannequin or statue. And it's in the end, it became Imam Mahdi, and he's in the waiting posture. And these are just other forms of how she recycles. I find it quite environmentally friendly kind of art, because you can literally use anything you have in your house and use them and reuse them. As you can see, cushions and old abayas, old clothes, that she just knows how to make them look nice once they are put on the mannequins. And then again, with cotton, she can reshape and resize the faces so they can be the size that she wants. She likes the hands to be very flexible, because sometimes she changes her ideas. So once she put the statue in the designated place, she might think, well, I think I prefer her to hold a candle, and that gives her that flexibility of doing things that she didn't plan. This is what they look like before they're dressed. And that's kind of also how a standing statue. And then you can see how makeup is used as well to make a white mannequin look Arabian, which I find interesting. There's a lot of statues or skeletons of statues, if you can see in the corner, bottom corner in the right, that are waiting to be worked on. In this exhibition alone, I think there were around 150 statues, and it took around 4 months to make. And that's the before and after in the Husseiniya, after the exhibition has been prepared and set up. She calls them, so she set up the stories into episodes. So this is Sayyida Zainab's life from birth to death. And each episode, she calls them portraits. So this is what you will see, and what you don't see is actually sound and smell and lights. So there's a lot of sensory equipment and elements involved there that gives you a different feel once you're there. It's just an interesting transformation. You will hear in this portrait, for example, it's a dialogue between Sayyida Zainab and Imam Ali about, and I think she was 5 years old in this image, where she's talking to her father about God and the existence of God and how he's one. And that just shows her depth of knowledge, and despite her young age. And this is what it will look like with one portrait after the other. In the next one, it was her and Prophet Muhammad, and there she's telling the Prophet about a dream that she had, and the Prophet is interpreting the dream for her, again with lots of sounds and sound effects as well, and smells and lights. So it's a very surreal experience once you're there. Again, just another example of another portrait of al-Banin. Abbas is the baby, and Sayyida Zainab and Imam Ali. So this, what you see here is Dhakirat al-Islam Museum in Karbala. I don't know if anyone have been there or anyone have seen it, but they've started this in 2016, I believe, 2014. And they have made those statues from ceramics. So it is, you will see the level of details are so fine. And I think this is what people expect when they see or hear the word art, that level of accuracy and depth of details and depictions, which is amazing, which is great. And that's an amazing work. And professional artists have been commissioned to do this kind of work. And it's there in Karbala. If you ever go to Karbala, have a look. However, the difference is very deep, like fine, because in here you go to appreciate the art. You go to the Dhakirat al-Islam Museum to appreciate what people can create under the name of Ahlul Bayt. Whereas the art that I showed you is more about the acts of worship. So it is placed in a Husseiniya where you attend the sermon and then you sit and then you react and you can stay for as long as you want. It creates kind of a moment with Ahlul Bayt. It's very different, and people have different opinions. I've heard people who prefers what you see, Dhakirat al-Islam, over that kind of ma'rad or exhibition. And there are people who prefer the more hands-on, the one that people actually do and touch, and they can touch Ahlul Bayt and they can hug them. And I think that's quite a different experience. And we can't say one is better than the other. I think combination is great. So the last one here is in Najaf. It's wax museum. I don't know if anyone have heard of it, but they have this incredible work, and they've commissioned again professional artists to do wax museums of ulama. Scholars, important scholars of Najaf, which is an amazing way of preserving history, of making it live, of making it current, of making people interested in knowing who are those people. And that's where art becomes significant in anything. Because if you look at civilizations, one of the major aspects that helped us today to learn about people in the past is the material things that are left. And art is a big part of it, like we have seen from the pyramids and paintings and drawings on the walls, till anything from like Michelangelo's paintings of in Italy, and all those material aspects have helped us understand more about people back then. And that's where I find art is quite playing a significant role with this as well, because you're seeing here different forms of how people decide to represent Ahlul Bayt or Madhab Ahlul Bayt. And all of these forms are targeted to different audiences, but at the same time, they're all doing one thing. They are trying to target and make you remember. And this is what I particularly liked about statues, is the fact that, and it's not me saying this, it's Mish'al who said it. She said, I've noticed that people remember the stories when they see the story in front of them more than when they hear it in a sermon and they forget it the moment they step out of the door. It stays with you. And the sound, the impression, the whole thing, as if you're seeing them live. And it's quite an impactful experience. So if you ever go to these places and they have museums, please do go and take pictures and talk about them, because they're doing great work. The last bit that I'm still in process of doing research on is the legacy. Where there in the UK, there's an amazing group of young people who are doing an incredible job of depicting Ahlul Bayt in various forms of art that you can imagine. From all the forms that I showed you, all of those present in their work and more. And it's quite impactful, because it's not just the effect of this work is not just in the UK, but other groups elsewhere in different Western countries are requesting to have that, come to their place, because they want to present Ahlul Bayt in that form. It's quite impactful, and I find their work very fascinating, and I cannot wait to do more research with them to understand a bit more of their history and what they're doing, and where they're heading, and who are those people now who are trying to implement this kind of art elsewhere. So I think I'm ending it up here, and I'm looking forward to any questions and comments. Thank you.
Cool. Any questions?
Assalamualaikum. When did the figurative art start coming up in the Shia history in that sense? Especially in painting, and of course, the ones you met showed those statues and mannequins. But even in paintings, I mean, we've seen Persian art and so on. They've had. But what was the time? When did it start? And what was the reason behind it? Because as far as I understand, in the historic past, even what Shia and Sunnis had non-figurative art.
A very good question. Unfortunately, my memory is very short, so I forget names. However, I'm going to tell you what I know. So yes, the Safavid era was all about, depicting Ahlul Bayt, and not just Ahlul Bayt, other things as well. And we have these amazing manuscripts that are still surviving, and they are a kind of a legacy of that time. So it's extending in history. However, the mainstream idea of Islam should not have depiction of any form started a bit during, I cannot remember the time frame now, but it was during, I think, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi's time, during the conquering of Jerusalem, and then when he took over. So I will refrain from using names because I'm mixing up a bit historically, but there have been incidents where they have taken from Romans and Christian civilizations, and because the coins used to be always having images of emperors, of their gods, so the new Muslim emperor decided we want to be different, and that's when he realized that making calligraphy rather than paintings or depiction of human beings will be a powerful statement of saying we are different and we are a massive civilization. And he used a lot of clerical scholars to disseminate among people saying that in Islam depiction is haram. It's mainly political, more than actually you won't find texts that are demeaning this, or they're saying it's not halal. But it's because it was quite an important moment for the Muslim ummah that people embraced it. And I think with time, because it wasn't documented very clearly, this has been brought down to history as Islam doesn't allow depictions. Otherwise, you wouldn't have seen it happening in lots of cultures, like the Safavids, for example, the Fatimid, as well, and even others have depictions. But again, it's starting, looking back at history, it started with a political statement just to announce dominance and we are different. I hope that answered your question.
Now, if you look at many of the mosques, very, very old ones, you find that, again, it's all non-figurative art rather than figurative. I mean, so it could not be a political issue. It could have been just religious issue. I'm just trying to find out.
I'm still exploring as well. But so far what I found, there has been a clear historical evidence to say it is Islamic or not to depict. It is mainly have gone down through opinions and about dominance and power. And it started with coins of only making the calligraphy, La ilaha illallah, Muhammadan Rasulullah, and making that as the main shi'ar, or, what's shi'ar in English would be. So
it was the fifth Imam's time, I mean, when these coins were done, where the Imam recommended to use the kalima rather than anything else.
Sorry, can you say that again?
It was fifth Imam's time that these coins came, and it was the Imam who recommended to have the kalima rather than any depiction of any human form.
With Ahlul Bayt, I haven't seen so far any obvious denouncing of depictions. Starting with Imam Sajjad, because their main objection was to spread ilm Ahlul Bayt, so the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt, and that's the form of writing. So he produced a lot of scholars, and it was, I think if I'm right, it was before the time of Imam Sajjad that these incidents have happened, where the calligraphy became the main iconography of Islam.
It's 50 Imam.
Yeah.
Thank you. How would you relate the passion plays in Iran during the Safavid times, which also obviously had the images or the action of Zuljana and this and that? Every village, every town had this passion play in Muharram. And it became quite artistic in that sense, but it was never frozen in form so you could see it. I believe to this day it continues, but that origin is in Safavid times. So I don't know what was the objection before Safavid, yeah?
Yeah, I've read about these plays during the Safavids, and they are quite fascinating because they started gradual, and they started with rich families having the land and having the space, and they wanted to make, again, the impressions of Ahlul Bayt quite powerful. And they did it as much as they were allowed to, and then when the Safavid era came to an end and things were not allowed, that's when things had to be stopped. And after that, with the revolution, it started again, but again with the kind of controlled notions, because we can't separate religion and politics. If we speak about depictions, you're speaking about politics. And to understand how these things have operated in history, we have to look at art in relation to politics, because it's this powerful that leaders consider art to be threatening. So they control, or they put kind of a limit to how much should be allowed or should not be allowed because of the impact it has on people. So yes, during the Safavid, it was an incredible passion plays. They've revived that a lot, but of course not to the extent that it was documented in history. But today as well, like they do have in some areas in Iran quite impressive forms of ta'ziyah, which is very beautiful.
Anything similar in the Arab world?
So they don't call it ta'ziyah, but across the Shi'i world, I would say, we're talking here about the Gulf and Iraq, they do have something similar, of course. And again, depending on how much flexibility they have, they involve these quite public appearances of Ahlul Bayt or their, depictions of Ahlul Bayt. So again, as I said, it's something that is quite time sensitive, and looking at it, you have to always look at what's going on political-wise.
Jazakallah khair for your talk. Thank you. I found it especially beautiful when you were making the distinction with aesthetics and form, and how some of these are more participatory forms of art, where we sometimes, maybe our own community, we underappreciate the forms of art that we're putting out as well, in terms of ritual, in terms of just the byproduct of what happens when we gather and what we produce that way. Given that sort of a community like ours in the Western world, we might not produce these kinds of art in the same way as is in a Muslim majority country. Does any of your research look at how, although the traditional forms are being followed, the traditional figurative forms and the performative forms are being followed in some sections in the West, do you see any sort of more participatory art forms emerging which aren't necessarily just figurative or just about the stories, whereas in sort of Western art, in Christian art, there's obviously been a move away from just depicting Christ, depicting sort of stories into more about concepts, more about relaying what our values are, relaying what our practices are. Do you see any of that in the Muslim world as well, or are we sort of stuck just talking about the same stories again and again, rather than like you were saying beautifully, people go away, they make it a practice to research those stories and bring out the values in them. Do you see any of that, any progress in how we're relaying things in our art?
This is a very good question, and I hope I can have the answer for all of this, but I don't, because I'm still in the process of looking at different communities and how they choose to depict Ahlul Bayt or how they think of it. But with a quick response from my observation so far, I think what I've noticed in the UK is there's a slight, I wouldn't say disconnect, but there's a lot of thinking that goes into why we should draw what we should draw. Whereas what I've seen in the Arab world, generally speaking again, there's less of that. It's the act of doing more than the act of thinking of why we should draw this and who would look at it and what the people will think while looking at it and what do we need to prove to others. That is kind of less. This is the main striking difference that I've noticed, and also the fact that I think it's quite normal because in here you're exposed to so many different groups, and it's by default, that you start to think that, well, if I know for sure that, this group is going to look at my work, I want to make sure that I present Shia Islam in the best picture possible, because I know what they're thinking about, I know their logic of thought, so I want to make sure that I don't prove them right, Kind of, that is the style, because I've noticed when I'm speaking to different young people who are interested in art, and I ask them, what would you like to draw? They're sticking to the forms of art that are common in museums, which is, again, calligraphy, geometrical shapes, and maybe a ruwaya there's called hurufiyat, which you draw with letters, and that is as far as they're thinking they may be able to do. When it comes to paintings, I haven't yet explored, so I can't speak about that. But in general, just a quick observation, I think there is a lot more thinking that happens here than I've noticed there. Yeah. You're welcome. But also because as I showed you, their work is being put in Husseyniyat. So they already know who's going to look at it and for what purpose. Whereas I think in here, it's much more open. So I think that level of awareness comes with the responsibility of, you have to think of cause and effect in a way. Yeah.
Any final questions?
I came a bit late. You might have covered this. So you looked at it from the Shia perspective and the Ahlul Bayt. What about the larger Muslim community? What about the Ahl Sunnah and their approach to art and their origin? What have they come up with?
I'm looking at that for my book because I still have to situate this whole research within a broader context, which is Islamic art. However, generally speaking, when we're talking about Kuwait, it's not just Shia in Kuwait, but Sunnis as well, and other Muslims. They are interested in art, so there will be a lot of galleries if you go, and there will be a lot of interesting private collections, and most of them happen to be Islamic, whether with this, carpet or calligraphy or any older vases that have nice decorations. So there is a big interest as well from the Sunni part, but I haven't seen Sunnis using art in commemorations or act of worship. That's the difference. And what I'm looking at is less of that you see in museums and more of what people do, if that makes sense, like what they practice.
Maybe it's worth exploring Sufi communities, because they might have, amongst the Sunnis, of course, depictions of their saints and whatever they have. So that might give you an equivalence, especially in North Africa, Turkey. Obviously, all this the whirling dervishes and all that is also an expression of some kind of spirituality, right? So I think amongst the Sufis, you might get a little bit more traction than amongst the others.
Yeah. And I think also the communities that we look at, for example, if we look at Muslims in Pakistan in general, Sunni or Shia, you will find quite a rich material culture there. Lots of colors, lots of art. So I think it depends on what community you look at. And the kind of general impressions is what guides people, because Shia are not living in their own world. They are part of the community as well, like a bigger community. So looking at that is going to draw interesting conclusions. I'm not touching yet that part of the world, but again, it has to be done in a very pragmatic way in order to make proper connections and understand the similarities and differences. Yep.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for your very enlightening talk. I know that you've looked mainly at traditional forms of art, like paintings, statues, theatre. But I was wondering, did you delve at all into any like modern forms of artistic or visual arts? Like for example, film, photography, or any kind of like crossover there. And is there like a connection between kind of ritual and prayer and having kind of more of a desire for traditional forms of art rather than something that we would associate with the modern world, for example, and like digital art or stuff with cameras and things like that?
Yeah, they do have a big range. That also a very good question. So they have vast range. What you've seen here is a fraction of what's actually practiced. Digital art is the top because, again, it's about what's happening today. And the majority of young people are interested in computers and computer science and designs and graphic design. So that is a big place of expression there. And some of them, they end up printing it. So they design and then print it, and it becomes a painting, or portrayed as a painting, but it's actually a digital art. You have people who do ceramics, and I think there are also a lot more different creative forms that they use with different fabrics and different multi-model, multimedia projects that I haven't talked about. Yeah. But yes, it is there.
Okay, I think we'll end there. Thank you so much for your talk. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Just a couple of quick announcements. Firstly, Zainab Sundus Latif has let us know that Abu Zainab unfortunately had a stroke and he's in an intensive care. So can we please do Amma Yujibu 5 times for him? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. So for the next couple of weeks we don't have a Friday program. And inshallah we will restart again in the new year. Just a couple of other things. Some of our other programs will still be on the website on sikkim.org.uk. We are also asking for volunteers to support feeding the homeless on Sunday 25th December on Christmas Day, on Tuesday 27th December, Wednesday 28th December and Tuesday 3rd of January at different churches across London. They're looking for food and volunteers. And so if you would like to participate in any of these, please let us know. And we will also be going on midnight mass at the local church again. So if you'd like to join again, please get in touch, and inshallah we will be making more of this shared out with everyone in due course. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.